Hi, it's Manny. Today's video is going to be about underwater. We're going underwater with the thoughts of the ETs, and that's Gloof and company, and they come from Sirius, and a lot of the thoughts that I'm going to share with you are done through automatic writing. But before we go on too much, I got a couple of housekeeping items that we got to clear up a little bit. Got to tell you, you guys are a sharp audience, and so we're gonna. A lot of people pointed out a couple things, and let's clarify that before we go underwater. Number one, we were talking about the sun being 93 million miles away. It is a thermonuclear plant that emits light and sound that we see, and a lot of other things are emitted from the sun that we don't see and quite yet understand, although we're getting very close. And that time I said that it takes the light of the sun 7 to 8 seconds to get here. No, it's 7 to 8 minutes. My mistake. 7 to 8 minutes. Guys, girls, you shouldn't smoke, but to give you an example, if you did smoke, it's about the time that it would take you to go outside your house, light a cigarette, and smoke one. In other words, the sun could cease to exist, and it's not going to. It's like we said before, it's a medium range star, and actually we're about halfway through its life expectancy, somewhere around there, and we still have 3-4 billion years to go according to the best calculations we have. So the sun disappearing or stopping is not going to happen. But to illustrate the point, it does take light emitting from the sun 7 to 8 minutes to travel from the sun to here. So the sun could be gone for 7 or 8 minutes and we wouldn't know. The other thing, there was this is a little more difficult, but we were talking about the Einstein-Rosen bridges. And those are connections between 2 points, 2 distances that could be a billion light years apart or a few yards apart. But the way that it was explained to me, there are moments where these, they don't like to call them wormholes, but the Einstein-Rosen bridge has been coined as wormholes. They prefer to call them portals or gates, bridges. These bridges open from time to time. They don't last forever. They are a very natural part of what's going on out there. The reason we're going to touch on them for a little bit is because in the writings, Gloof and the other ET indicates that this is a natural phenomenon, that the universe is a geometrically beautiful design, composure, and it rotates and spins and has cycles. And as Mr. Einstein theorized, it also is, most of it is curved. It's round. I think Einstein said that if you leave our universe at any point in time and you travel in a certain direction fast enough, you would end up, after you circled around the known universe, you'd end up where you started. And more of Mr. Einstein's thought experiments in a minute. But without getting too entangled in quantum physics, they point to observer A and B, and they call them Bob and Alice. And let me tell you something, what this Einstein-Rosen explanation and why they think it's not possible is because they say, well, if there are 2 black holes, which we talked about extensively before, and these 2 black holes, tremendous force going and spinning, that there may be a connection between those 2 that's open, and that's the an example of an Einstein-Rosen bridge. And they say, but if observer A, Alice, and observer B, Bob, are on either end of these things, they actually may be able to see each other, although they're at large distances apart. But if they try to, they may be able to communicate, but if they try to jump in to get together, they would surely die. Look, they don't have to die, and they don't have to jump in. These portals and gates and doors are, you don't necessarily have to go to a black hole, which is about one of the strongest natural phenomena in space, to see the portal, the Einstein-Rosen bridge. It's created often and naturally, and you have to study them. I think we referred to the fact that you don't want to go to Grand Central Station and jump on any train because you don't know where it's going. And some of the places where you may end up, you don't want to be there. It may not be in your best interest. So what they say is that they study them, they know when they open, they have a pretty good idea of how long it's going to be open, and they do use them. And some of those are for material things, but as we're getting there, there can also be transmittal. The portal can open interdimensionally so that you can project thoughts. It doesn't always mean that the portal is used to travel physically. It can be a communication bridge, not necessarily a transportation bridge. And so that some of these links that come and people get these great ideas and everything may be coming through a communication bridge, not necessarily with direct contact with an ET. All right, so it is cyclical, and they're naturally, and they've been happening here on Earth. We're going to touch real quick here on two things. Number one, there's throughout cultures, throughout the earth and lore, there are many accounts of people that walk into a forest and never come back and never be seen, or they seem to walk onto the side of a mountain and they're gone. They may be experiencing these portals that, unbeknownst to them, somebody might have walked into an open portal. And so, in other words, it's not something new to us living here on the planet. In these conversations, we are using the mind, and I've stated before, I'm not an engineer or a physicist. These are messages communicated through automatic writing that I've been able to determine come from an ET, in particular Gloof, but there are also others that come through in this perhaps Einstein-Rosen communication bridge, and I get some ideas that they want me to share with you. That's all we're doing. Is some of you find it just completely unbelievable, treat it as science fiction and enjoy the ride. Speaking of science fiction, one of the best known thought experiments is, and again, Mr. Einstein, when he was 16 years old, he had a thought experiment, he said. He essentially jumped on a motorcycle in his mind, this is all a thought experiment, and rode alongside a beam of light. And this thought experiment allowed him to begin. There appears to be no direct correlation between the thought experiment and the final paper on relativity, but he thought enough of it to put it in his own biography, and there had been some influence in his thinking and his writing. And he played with this thing. And the reason I bring that up is because a lot of the things we're talking about here that we can't see, that I'm telling you, that others and other YouTube videos are sharing, are communications through thought, through the mind. It's a sharing. For those of you that are unable to, or physically unable to, or have other limitations, use your mind. Allow your mind to travel, to see. Always seek God's light and the highest vibration you can, and love when you do these things, because there are dangerous areas out there. But please, the message is to not feel confined by your age or your physical condition or your geographic location or your economic situation. You may not be able to travel, or you may not be able to move from a chair. But God has given us the mind, and the mind is a very powerful tool. And you can use that mind to travel and to see things, much like young Mr. Einstein did. So let's play a little game. And join him, since he started it. He felt that in order to study, there was still some issues about ether and the speed of light and everything. It seems to be pretty much an agreement. We all agree, or it has been determined, that the speed of light is as fast as anything made of matter can travel. And so this is the cause for great experiments and thinking of how we travel, and if the maximum is the speed of light, and we measure the distance between our star, our sun, and other suns and stars by how far are they in terms of light years. Proxima Centauri, it's, or how far would it take to get to Sirius? 8.5 billion light years. These are incredible speeds, and from everything we know, it can happen. This is why we've talked about the Einstein-Rosen bridges and the communication between us and them in a thought mode. Now, I said we're not going to get too entangled in yeah, there's a pun behind that, some of you know it, entangled in quantum physics, but the point is that in quantum physics and in the Einstein-Rosen bridges, they take these observers and they're trying to determine whether the velocity and the location of a particular electron can be determined at the same time by an observer. But what if you put observer A, Alice, and observer B, Bob? Can they, if one determines whether the electron is moving up, and we now know that always, it seems like the entangled particle will travel the opposite direction. So if one is traveling up, can Bob then know that Alice's is traveling up, so therefore his is traveling down, and he could determine the location? And this leads to a whole series of paradoxes and problems, and the EPR, the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox, etc. What they were telling me, let's go back to the beam of light for a minute. So if Mr. Einstein can do it, we're going to do it. We're going to jump on a motorcycle and we're going to go follow Mr. Einstein on his thing. And just for chuckles, we know that the speed of light is the fastest you can travel. So therefore, we're going to call that the speed limit. So if he's going at the speed limit, and he already told us that he did this, he rode this beam of light. Now, according to theory, you can't go the speed of light because the mass, in other words, the weight and the presence of the motorcycle and the individual, won't allow you to go as fast as the beam of light you're traveling on. But he said, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to go as fast as that speed of light. Well, if he goes that far, let's play the game and say, what if he's already out there at the speed of light and he decides to kick it into a higher gear? Could he then go faster? Would his motorcycle, by accelerating to the maximum, would he be able to travel faster than the beam he's riding on? And if he did, what then would he see? Would he see, because we're now traveling faster than the speed of light, which supposedly we can't do, but we can't travel as fast anyway, and he did it, well, let's go faster. What could you see if you're traveling faster than the speed of light? Could you see the future because you're traveling faster than the speed of light? Or could you then see the past? Because he said that, the relativity implies that if I'm going faster than the speed of light, the person behind me is traveling at a slower time level. So it opens up a lot of possibilities. I'm just taking you there to let you know that you have a mind, to use it, and just like Mr. Einstein completely saved us and changed, I don't mean save us, saved us from myth and things that we didn't understand, and opened the door to a much more beautiful and logical universe. And perhaps one of you, or many of you, I encourage you to do thought experiments and to see what you find and to see what you see, always looking for light and asking for guidance and protection. Remember, there's stuff out there that is not necessarily good. But the message before I go underwater is that God has allowed us a mind, and that mind is to be used and to be creative and to dream, and that's okay. Okay, part of the underwater, I want you to understand that some of the premises on which I go is that the universe is multidimensional, that there are parallel universe. I have shared with you all some of my beliefs. I believe in God. I believe in Christ and in the Holy Spirit, and that we have certain indications that are very clear to us that there are beings that are not of this dimension. Christ often, as he in his ministry on earth, preached the kingdom of God, healed the sick, and cast out spirits. And those were bad spirits. So there are good spirits and bad spirits. And here also there was one, and I'm going to paraphrase and let you all look it up yourself, but there is that famous one of, he is sitting with his disciples and he asks them, who do they say I am? And the disciples start to answer, they think that you are Elijah, they think that you are the coming of. In other words, they were saying to him that the public is saying that you are Elijah or other prophets that were already dead. Now Christ says, doesn't stop them and say, well, that's impossible. I mean, these people are dead. How could I be the reincarnation of one of them? He doesn't refute that at all. He just very simply says, okay, well, that's what they say, but who do you think I am? And that's when Peter jumps up and tells him, and he says, you've spoken well, and what you're speaking comes from my Father and the Spirit of truth. That is all to say that the possibility of past lives is not refuted by Christ when confronted with, they say that you are the reincarnation of somebody else. So in that, I think, pretty much concludes my housekeeping items. We covered the light traveling from the sun, the Einstein-Rosen bridges, and the reason why we believe that they can exist, even though quantum physics today say, no, it can't be, because Bob and Alice would die if they jumped in. They are there, and they are used often. Underwater. The Earth is about 73% water. In fact, 3/4, let's just say 3/4. And the communications in the writings, I mentioned that they indicate that they are from Syria, and Sirius, the planet, the star Sirius, and that their indication is that a planet such as ours is very common, that there are many planets that are covered with liquid. We're not going to say that it's exactly H2O with the salinity and degree that ours is, but that planets that are mostly water, some more than ours, some less, are common, and that they do travel underneath. They travel through our waters, and in fact, many of them prefer underwater travel than through airspace. That is according to them for a lot of reasons. They are more familiar with traveling through liquid and feel more comfortable doing it, and I'll tell you in a minute how they say they do it. But also, most of it here is water, and most of the stuff, really interesting stuff, is going on underneath. you can scan the internet, and various studies have been made, but in general, our understanding and our exploration of the sea and what's beneath it is very limited. I've saw some statements where they say that we know more about the surface of the moon and even the surface of Mars than we know what's at the bottom of our oceans. So it's very interesting when they go down and they speak of it. First, how do they do it? The craft that we described before, sentient crafts, well structured, using currents and powers, when they go underneath, yes, it's denser. Denser meaning, water is denser than air, and it's colder. And the deeper you go, it often gets colder and denser. In fact, Gloof tells me underneath, if you go deep enough, there are lakes within the water because the water is a certain density, but there are areas that are much denser that it would be the equivalent of us running into a lake. In other words, there are pockets down there where there is even denser condensation of water. Traveling through the liquid, what Gloof was trying to explain to me was that, again, they don't propel or force their way as we do. We get these giant propellers, or screws they call them, and we power them with nuclear or diesel or whatever to turn a huge propeller to move a tube through underwater. No, what they do is, what they were telling me they do is that they understand the condensation of the ocean is made of H2O, hydrogen, two hydrogens, one oxygen, and the salinity and the condensation. Then they study what it's made of, and what they do is, again, using not audible sound, but a combination of braided, interwoven sound shields and movement. They can essentially, he didn't say dissolve, but soften the composition of those atoms long enough so that they direct that beam of sound where they want to go. And what the beam of sound then does is soften the bond between the hydrogen and the oxygen long enough that it almost creates a mini vacuum. And what happens when we create a vacuum? The ship literally gets sucked into it. So they are traveling and they're dissolving, although it's not really dissolving, it's loosening the bonds between the molecules long enough for them to go and glide through them at the speed of glide. They're not forcing their way through our oceans, and they're not emitting sounds that would disturb the. It's not sonar, and it doesn't interfere with a normal sonar use like of whales and dolphins and other underwater animals. The richness of our oceans, they said, is prolific. There are many more species, and there are many more types of plants, animals, and actually above water it is easier to distinguish, and you read that in your biology books, what is a plant and an animal. And we say, well, that's the plant kingdom, and this is the animal kingdom, and this is the rocks, and it's pretty easy. Although even botanists and biologists would tell you that some animals are like, it's hard to tell whether they're a plant or an animal or what it is. Underneath, they are much more difficult to determine whether they're plant or animal. In some cases, some of them are more like bacteria. Because of the vastness of the oceans, there are very large animals. We only know the ones in the surface. And as you know, the whale is the largest mammal on Earth, and it's just on the surface. The squid-like beings that we've been able to pull up are There's some giant squids. We have had skeleton remains of massive sharks that were bigger than the whales we have now. What is happening down there is a treasure trove of organisms. And they love it because they say that if we took the time to study what's down there, we would be able to see that life has to be in other planets, because what they're finding underneath there, or what they can find and they can see, even on the poles where it's supposed to be frozen, no, there are tremendous varieties of species of all kinds and all shapes. As far as things that look like us, would we find mermaids and pretty things? Some of them are incredibly beautiful. Their colors, the way they move, and how they travel. Are there mermaid type creatures? Not here, not today, but in other planets and in past times, there have been creatures that are very much part fish and part animal. And if you take the time to look at the natural, go back to our early civilization, the Sumerian, what is now Iraq, and as you in the Southwest Pueblo Indians, just about anywhere, India, China, whatever, there are representations of creatures that are not known now, and they appear to be half human, let's say, and half animal, or human looking cat or lion faces in the hieroglyphics in Egypt, that there are very interesting reptilian combinations in Southwest Asia and China, and there are even representations of things that have a fish tail with a human body. Some people say, well, that's just imaginative interpretation. Well, maybe. It can also be what they observed, what was here before, or what came through one of the portals. The message is the universe is very large. There may be, and I'm sure there are, other parallel universes and dimension. God is in control, and God is saying to us, don't limit me. Don't, because you can't imagine it doesn't mean that I didn't. And because you can't, our brain is accustomed to, almost designed to look for patterns and forms to explain to us what we're seeing. So when something that we see or observe, or somebody else has observed and seen, doesn't fit into what we understand or know, we want to dismiss it as science fiction or fantasy or a malfunctioning organic problem with the brain. A person that brought some of the greatest beauty to the earth in the form of his artwork was Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, he's created things that are just beautiful. And, what am I talking about? The Mona Lisa, the Last Supper, those are paintings, some of his. He looked at submarines and tanks and helicopters and drew some wonderful things that he was way ahead of his time, and his beauty is one of the greatest, most beautiful creations done by a person down here. There is a series of drawings by Leonardo that are often not talked about, but he has a series of portraits of things, and they are almost human-like, but they're grotesque. They have odd features and large noses and large, strange foreheads. And some people say, well, maybe he was just practicing or imagining these things. There is the possibility that Mr. Da Vinci was actually drawing what he saw, and that he saw it either through a portal or through communication, like I said before, a mental bridge and that he was in actual communication. It would be interesting to. I would encourage you to look up some of Leonardo da Vinci's. I don't know how they categorize them. Look for Leonardo da Vinci grotesque paintings, and it may come up. Underwater, it is blows away anything we have up here. We should spend more time. Why aren't we doing it? I think the simple question is economics. The exploration of the deep oceans, the life and what's down there, there isn't an immediate economic return. So who would do it? I mean, other than strictly an organization funded by private funds that would dedicate millions of dollars to deep ocean exploration, because we don't go very deep unless there's oil or something that we want and can sell. And the deep ocean, these deep drills that we have to pull up oil, they don't go that deep, not compared to what is down there. We're just literally scratching the surface. The oceans contain such variety that it was hard for Gloof to tell me and hard for me to describe to you. Let your imagination, if you can imagine it, it probably grows in a liquid surface somewhere in this universe. And some of the stuff that grows or lives in the deep oceans here is fascinating. Every once in a while, we get our minds blown when they pull up an animal or a plant that we've never seen before, or something that we thought was extinct. The xylophant, or whatever that fish is they found off of the coast of East Africa, that they thought had been extinct for millions of years, and there they were, and there were many of them, and they were pulling them up thinking a lot of them didn't know. It's an interesting look into that. I don't want to go on too much further here. We may talk about the deep oceans a little bit more. Remember, God is a great creator. It is one of geometry, of concentric circles. Look for the light and the beauty in the creation. Are there things that are dangerous and we want to stay away from? Absolutely. Spiritually and physically. Spiritually, if you want to turn to the Bible says that Lucifer, Satan, whatever, convinced a third of God's angels to go his way with logic and reasoning. And these are bad things, and you need protection, and you need to stay with the light and always seek the highest vibration that you can, and ask God for light and protection. That having been said, with your mind and your eyes and everything you have that God gave you, from your own living room, from your wheelchair, from your wherever you are, let your mind soar and explore, and always look for the beauty in the creation that surrounds us. Are there bad things out there? Of course, but it's beautiful too. Thank you so much. Hope you travel at the speed of glide. And when we meet again, I want to wish you love and light and the highest vibrations. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to leave comments, some of you leave great comments, and I've had to use them as corrections for some of the future videos. Thank you so much for your time. I know we're carrying on a little bit. We'll see you soon, I hope.